They found him standing by the river at dawn, his bare feet sinking into the frost-bitten mud, his thin fingers slick with drying blood. The air was heavy with the scent of iron and decay. A low mist rolled across Mill Creek, swallowing the early light and muffling the world until even the birds refused to sing. The sheriff, a man named Alden Pierce, had seen death before, too much of it during the war. But there was something unnatural about the stillness of this scene. The boy didn't cry, didn't tremble. He simply looked up when the horse approached and said, "Good morning, Sheriff," as though he were waiting. The boy's name was Timothy Caldwell, age 10, though he looked younger, fragile underneath, skin pale enough to show the blue of his veins. His father, a farmer, had died in the winter of '66, and his mother, folks whispered, had lost her mind soon after. She would wander the fields at night, singing lullabies to the scarecrows until the cold silenced her too. When the sheriff asked whose blood was on his hands, Timothy answered. He screamed too loud. By noon, word had spread. Mill Creek was small. Barely 24 homes, one church, one tavern, and rumor moved faster than truth. Men with lanterns and rifles gathered near the riverbank, following the trail Timothy had come from. They found what they were looking for in the reeds, the body of Eli Morgan, the mill owner's son. The wound across his throat was clean, almost surgical, no signs of a struggle, only one set of footprints beside the body, small, bare, unmistakably a child's. That evening the townsfolk crowded into the church, whispering about curses, devils, and vengeance. A child capable of such a thing? No one wanted to believe it, yet no one could deny what they'd seen. The preacher spoke of temptation and the darkness that lingers after war. The women crossed themselves. The men loaded their rifles, but one man among them, Dr. Samuel Harding, the town physician, saw something different. He'd been a field surgeon during the war, had seen boys Timothy's age picked through corpses for gold teeth. Evil, he thought, wasn't born, it was taught, carved into flesh and memory. So when the sheriff asked what to do, Harding offered to take the boy into his care. For study, he said, and for safety. Harding's home stood at the edge of town, overlooking the black water of Mill Creek. It was an old, creaking house filled with the smell of iodine, tobacco, and loneliness. He prepared a small room for Timothy, a cot, a basin of water, a single candle. "Do you understand why you're here?" he asked that night. Timothy nodded. "Because they're afraid of me." The boy was polite, eerily composed. He ate when told, slept when told, though Harding noticed his eyes never truly closed. In the mornings, Timothy would sit by the window, watching the fog drift between the trees as though searching for something. Harding began to keep a detailed ledger of his behavior. Day 3, the shows no emotional reaction when confronted with his crime. Day 4, he displays exceptional memory, recalls medical terms from overheard conversations. Day 60, fixates on anatomy books, asked to see the preserved heart in my study jar. At first, Harding convinced himself the boy was simply traumatized, his mind fractured by grief and neglect. But that illusion cracked one night when he awoke to soft humming. He found Timothy in his study, standing before the shelves, his hands covered in something dark. On the table lay a small bird, dissected with precision far beyond a child's skill. "I wanted to know why it stopped singing," the boy said. Harding should have been horrified. Instead, he was fascinated. There was a clarity in Timothy's reasoning, a detachment that mirrored his own from years of battlefield surgery. Still, he made a note that night lacks empathy, responds only to curiosity. The next morning, the preacher came knocking. "You can't keep him, doctor. There's a sickness in him." Harding argued it was a medical case, not a spiritual one. But the preacher's words lingered. "The devil wears many faces, Sam. Sometimes he smiles like a child." Weeks passed. Harding's sleep grew shallow. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he'd hear footsteps, soft and deliberate, moving through the house. He began to find his medical tools rearranged, perfectly aligned by size and sharpness. Once, his reflection in the mirror blinked a half-second too late. When he turned, Timothy was standing silently behind him. "You're watching me," Harding said. The boy smiled. "So are they." "Woo." the doctor asked. Timothy looked toward the empty hallway. The ones that hum. They come when you stop talking. That night, Harding dreamed of rivers running backward, of pale hands reaching up from the mud. He woke to find Timothy sitting at the foot of his bed, whispering. "You talk in your sleep?" the boy said. "You say names." "What names?" Harding asked, his voice trembling. "Men you couldn't save." The doctor said nothing. He couldn't remember telling the boy anything about the war. But the look in Timothy's eyes said he knew things no child should. By early November, the town had turned fully against Harding. They said the crops failed because of the boy, that the cows refused to give milk, that the preacher's wife woke screaming each night, claiming to see a child standing at the foot of her bed. Harding called it mass hysteria, but even he had started to doubt. He'd begun to feel cold in his own house, as if something unseen followed the boy wherever he went. One evening, Harding found a dead rabbit on his porch, its chest neatly opened, heart missing. He confronted Timothy, who only said, "It didn't need it anymore." The doctor's patience snapped. "You are not to touch another living thing," he shouted. Timothy's face remained blank. "I don't hurt them," he said softly. "I study them, like you study me." That night, Harding wrote a single line in his journal before extinguishing the lamp. "I wanted to believe I could fix him, but I am beginning to think he's fixing me." Outside, the fog pressed close to the windows, and the crickets had gone silent. The boy lay awake in his bed, eyes reflecting the faint light of the moon. Somewhere deep in the dark, something hummed. Dr. Samuel Harding began keeping the boy in what he called structured observation. To the rest of Mill Creek, that sounded harmless, a man of science studying a troubled orphan. But behind the shutters of the old clapboard house, observation turned into something far stranger. Each day Harding would test Timothy's reactions to temperature, light, pain, even fear. The doctor's logic was simple. If Timothy truly lacked emotion, it could be measured. And if it could be measured, perhaps it could be cured. He began with small tests. Harding would prick the boy's fingertip with a sterilized needle, record the pulse, the pupil dilation, the muscle response. Nothing. Not a flinch, not even a blink. Once, Harding drew the needle deeper than he meant to, and a thin line of blood trickled down Timothy's hand. The boy looked at it thoughtfully, then smeared it across his palm, whispering, "That's how you know it's real." Harding wrote for hours afterward, his pen scratching through the night. Subject exhibits indifference to pain, fascination with the properties of blood. The doctor told himself this was progress, knowledge born from darkness. But in truth, he was beginning to feel something dangerously close to admiration. When Timothy wasn't being studied, he explored the house. Quiet, careful, always watching. He spent hours in Harding's study, flipping through anatomy texts, sometimes sketching the diagrams from memory. His drawings were precise but unsettling, not hearts or lungs, but faces opened like flowers, veins spreading outward like roots. One afternoon, Harding returned from town to find Timothy standing over the dissecting table with a dead crow laid neatly on a cloth. "I found it by the road," the boy said. "I wanted to see if the inside matched the book." Harding froze. He should have been angry. But instead, he found himself leaning closer, inspecting the precision of the cuts. "Who taught you to do this?" he asked. Timothy looked up, his pale blue eyes unblinking. "No one," he said. "It's just remembering." Harding didn't know what that meant. Remembering what? The weeks turned colder, and the doctor's house began to feel smaller. Each night, he locked the cabinets, counted his instruments twice, and yet each morning something was slightly out of place. A scalpel missing, a drawer left open, the smell of disinfectant faintly stronger than before. Timothy's candle burned late into the night. Once, Harding caught him murmuring to himself, tracing invisible shapes on the wall. When asked what he was doing, the boy replied, listening to the hum. "The hum?" Harding repeated. "The one in the walls. It tells me what's underneath." Harding dismissed it as imagination. But the following week, when he lifted a loose floorboard to check for rats, he found something strange. Beneath the plank lay a small collection of bones, bird, mouse, maybe rabbit, cleaned and arranged into near-perfect symmetry, tiny ribs lined up like piano keys. Timothy stood behind him, expression calm. "They were noisy," he said. Harding's hands trembled as he replaced the board. That night he locked the boy's door. Yet sometime before dawn, he woke to find it open again. The entries in Harding's ledger grew more frantic. Day 28, subject continues to show no remorse. Has begun performing dissections without instruction. Day 30, person claims to hear movement within walls. No evidence of infestation. Day 33, sleepwalking or conscious wandering. Still, Harding couldn't bring himself to stop. There was a kind of terrible beauty in Timothy's mind, a curiosity unchained from morality. To a man who had spent years stitching the dead and dying, it felt familiar. He began pushing the boundaries of his own science. He introduced Timothy to experiments meant to test empathy, showing him drawings of people crying, stories of pain and joy. No reaction. But when Harding read medical descriptions, decapitations, vivisections, the boy's pulse quickened slightly, almost imperceptibly. "You like that?" Harding asked quietly. "No," Timothy said. "It just feels true." The doctor found himself unable to look away. He wrote a new hypothesis. Perhaps empathy is not a universal constant. Perhaps some minds are born without the capacity for it, and in its place grows understanding of a different kind. By December, snow covered the ground in Mill Creek, blanketing the town in silence. Harding hadn't attended church in weeks, nor written to his colleagues in Boston again. He avoided the sheriff, the neighbors, even the mirror. His skin had grown pale, his hands shook constantly. Timothy, by contrast, looked healthier than ever. One evening, Harding entered the study to find the boy standing before the mirror, holding the doctor's pocket watch. "It ticks even when no one touches it," Timothy said. "Does that mean it's alive?" "No," Harding replied. "Machines only imitate life." "Then what are we imitating?" Timothy asked, eyes never leaving the reflection. Harding felt something shift inside him, a thin line between fascination and fear snapping all at once. He reached out, snatched the watch away, and muttered, "You're not ready to ask that question." But as he turned, Timothy said softly, "I think you are." That night, the dreams came worse than ever. Harding saw the field hospital again, men screaming, blood everywhere, the smell of chloroform and rot. But in the dream, every wounded man had the same face, Timothy's. He woke drenched in sweat, his chest pounding, only to find the boy sitting in the doorway, awake watching. "You dream too loud," Timothy whispered. Harding's sanity began to fray. He started locking himself in the study, rereading his notes, searching for patterns. His handwriting grew erratic, his sentences circular. One entry read, "Perhaps Timothy is not broken. Perhaps he is what we will all become, a cleaner design." The town's patience finally snapped when a stray dog was found mutilated behind the tavern. Everyone knew who they blamed. A mob formed that night, torches in hand. Demanding Harding hand the boy over, the sheriff led them, though even he looked uneasy. "Sam, this can't go on. He's not right. Whatever you're doing in that house, it ain't medicine." Harding stood in the doorway, eyes hollow. "You think you can burn evil out of the world," he said. "But what if it's not evil? What if it's evolution?" The mob hesitated, uncertain whether he was defending the boy or himself. Timothy stood behind him, silent, his expression unreadable. The preacher shouted, "That thing's no child!" But before anyone could move, Timothy smiled faintly and whispered, "You shouldn't come inside." The next flash of lightning blinded them all. When their vision cleared, the house was dark. The door had slammed shut by itself. For 2 days no one saw either of them. On the third, the sheriff broke in. The house smelled of formaldehyde and smoke. Harding's study was in ruins, pages torn, instruments scattered. In the center of the room lay a dissecting table, blood-stained and empty. On the wall, in careful handwriting, someone had scrawled, "The experiment continues." Of the doctor, there was no trace. Only Timothy's small footprints led out the back door, vanishing into the snow. That winter, 3 towns over, a farmer reported finding a child wandering along the road barefoot, pale, and humming. When asked his name, He smiled and said, "I'm still learning." The morning after the sheriff found Dr. Harding's house empty, a gray fog clung to Mill Creek like a shroud. It rolled down from the hills and gathered at the edges of the dirt road, swallowing the outlines of barns and fences. Inside the tavern, no one spoke above a whisper. The smell of rain mixed with wood smoke and unease. Every sound, the creak of a chair, the clink of a cup, felt amplified in the silence that followed what people now called the Night of the Light. The sheriff, a heavyset man named Enoch Mallory, hadn't slept since he entered Harding's study. He'd seen plenty of bad things during and after the war, men shot, burned, half alive, but nothing had prepared him for the feeling that something unseen had watched him as he walked through that empty house. He told no one about the faint humming sound that seemed to echo behind the walls, or the way the air felt charged, like right before a thunderstorm. By noon, word spread across the county. Journalists from neighboring towns arrived, their notebooks ready, drawn by rumors of a child experiment gone wrong. One even claimed that Harding had been attempting to build a new kind of man. The more they speculated, the less human Timothy became in their telling. The official investigation, led by the county coroner and 3 deputies, lasted nearly a month. They found blood on the floorboards, yes, but not enough for a body. They found broken glass, melted candle wax, and footprints leading nowhere. Harding's journals were half burned, as if someone had tried to destroy them, but changed their mind halfway through. The last complete entry, dated December 18, 1867, reads simply, "The boy understands more than he shows. Perhaps too much. If I fail, he will finish it." That sentence was underlined 3 times. Rumors began to replace facts. Some said Harding had gone mad and fled with the boy into the hills. Others believed Timothy had killed him, dissected him like one of his animals, and vanished into the woods. The church elders insisted the devil himself had been working through the child, and the preacher's voice grew hoarse, warning people not to utter Timothy's name after dark. The sheriff ordered a full search of the woods surrounding the property. For 2 weeks, 30 men combed through the snowdrifts and hollow trees. What they found instead were smaller, Stranger Things bird skeletons arranged in circles, shards of mirror tied to branches with twine, and the occasional whittled figurine of a human figure, each one missing its eyes. By the time spring thawed the rivers, most had given up. The house was boarded, and the land auctioned, and the town of Mill Creek tried, as best it could, to forget. But forgetting is not the same as healing. Within a year, children walking past the old Harding place began reporting noises, soft tapping from inside, or faint humming drifting through the cracks. Some swore they saw a face in the window, too pale to be alive. One night, a farmer named Luther Gable, drunk and daring, went to prove there was nothing to fear. He broke a window, climbed inside, and didn't come home till dawn. When his wife found him the next morning, he was sitting in the kitchen, shaking, muttering one phrase over and over, "It watched me through the mirror." He left Mill Creek 2 days later and never returned. By 1870, the legend had grown. Travelers told of a ghost child wandering near the creek, barefoot and humming, his breath misting in the summer air as if he carried winter with him. The locals began calling him the Humming Boy, but some didn't believe it was a ghost at all. A few, especially the older war veterans, claimed it was something else, a survivor, twisted by whatever Harding had done, living off the land like a specter. One even swore he saw a boy's figure crouched near the tree line, dissecting a rabbit with surgical precision before melting into the fog. A doctor from Jefferson City arrived that fall, intrigued by the stories. His name was Dr. Abel Forsyth, a colleague of Harding's who had once studied under him in Boston. Forsyth brought with him letters Harding had sent years before, letters that hinted at a new field of study, pathological empathy deficiency. He spent several days interviewing the townsfolk, taking notes, collecting fragments of burned journals. He concluded that Harding had been exploring what we would now call psychopathy, but without the language or ethics of modern medicine. In his own report, Forsyth wrote if the boy truly lacked moral sense, and the doctor sought to awaken it through stress or fear, He may have inadvertently created the very monster he hoped to cure. That line was later reprinted in several regional newspapers, solidifying the myth, the brilliant doctor destroyed by his own experiment. But Forsyth found one detail that no one else had noticed. A letter Harding never sent, dated 2 weeks before the disappearance. It read, "There are moments when the boy speaks of things he should not know, of machines that breathe, of thoughts stored in glass, of a future without blood. I cannot explain how he knows these things. Sometimes I fear he remembers something that has not yet happened." Forsyth dismissed it as delusion, but the phrasing haunted him. He included it in his private journal, where it remained until his death in 1881. Over the next decade, Mill Creek withered. The mines closed, the river flooded twice, and families moved away. The Harding house, left to rot, became a dare for teenagers and a sermon topic for the faithful. Those who went inside often spoke of hearing faint breathing or feeling the air shift when they said Timothy's name aloud. A few even claimed the mirrors in the old parlor reflected faces that weren't their own. By the early 1900s, the legend had transformed again. Newspapers from St. Louis ran sensational stories under headlines like "The Demon Boi of Merrill Chirike" and "The Oldebuicho Utividu S. Shirtuar." The truth, by then, was lost beneath decades of retelling. Yet every few years, someone new claimed to have evidence. In 1913, a field worker unearthed a small tin box beneath the foundation of the Harding home. Inside were several yellowed papers, one of which appeared to be a child's drawing a house, a table, and 2 stick figures. Above them, written in uneven scrawl, were the words, "It's still learning." That drawing was sent to a university in Kansas for analysis, but mysteriously vanished from their archives a few years later. The curator responsible for the collection reportedly quit without explanation. Today, historians debate whether Timothy Caldwell ever truly existed. Some believe he was a composite of local folklore, blending frontier fear with post-war trauma. Others argue the evidence, the journals, the sheriff's reports, the drawings, proves there was indeed a boy, and that Dr. Harding's disappearance was covered up to protect the reputation of 19th century medicine. Yet the strangest part is this: there is a photograph, faded and cracked, discovered in the archives of the Missouri Historical Society in 1972. It shows a young boy, maybe 10 years old, seated beside a medical instrument table. His face is expressionless, his eyes almost white from overexposure. On the back, written in a steady hand, Mill Creek subject Fani 1, Harding S. No one knows who donated it. The curator who cataloged it described a faint humming sound in the recording room as he examined the print. He laughed about it in an interview years later. "Probably the lights," he said. "Still, sometimes I think I hear it when the room's too quiet." And so the story lingers, not as a simple ghost tale, but as something colder, a reminder that evil doesn't always arrive with violence or fire. Sometimes it comes as a question, a curiosity, a child with eyes too calm for his age asking, "What makes you human?" Mill Creek is gone now. Only a scattering of stone foundations remain where the town once stood. But locals say that on winter nights, when the wind slips through the empty valley, you can hear a faint melody beneath the gusts, a low, steady hum like the vibration of a machine still running after its maker has died. And if you listen long enough, some claim it almost sounds like a heartbeat. By the late 20th century, the legend of Timothy Caldwell had settled into that strange space between history and folklore, the kind of story that gathered dust in old town archives and resurfaced whenever someone needed a ghost tale for the local paper. But history has a way of stirring itself awake when someone looks too closely. And that's exactly what happened in 1996, when graduate student Laura Pennington stumbled upon a reference to the Mill Creek experiment in a forgotten thesis on Civil War-era medicine. At first, it was just a footnote, a passing mention of Dr. Samuel Harding and his morally defective ward. But the phrasing caught her attention. She'd been studying the development of early psychiatric practices in rural America, and the idea of an experimental ward in 1867 Missouri was too bizarre to ignore. Pennington, curious and young enough to still believe every mystery could be solved through research, filed a request to access the Harding collection stored in the Jefferson County Archives. What she found was a cardboard box marked property of Dr. A. for c. the 1868, sealed with brittle tape. Inside were 7 pages of correspondence, 3 sketches of human anatomy, and a folded piece of parchment covered in fine, looping handwriting. It was a fragment of Harding's own journal. One of the pages thought to have been burned the night he vanished. The entry was dated December 10, 1867, just 8 days before the last known one. It read, "He asked today what fear feels like. I told him it lives in the heart. He said he couldn't find it there. He said perhaps he'd lost it when he was born." The handwriting trembled near the end, as though Harding had been interrupted mid-sentence. Pennington included this in her dissertation, citing it as evidence of an early attempt to study psychopathy in children nearly a century before the term existed. Her paper, published in 1998, reignited public fascination with the case. Soon, the story of the boy without fear was back in circulation, this time on late-night radio shows and primitive internet message boards. Listeners began sharing accounts of visiting the overgrown ruins of Mill Creek, claiming to hear the faint hum described in early reports. Others swore they saw flickering lights through the trees or smelled formaldehyde in the air. Skeptics dismissed it all as suggestion, the power of story manifesting in nervous minds. But the timing was uncanny, because just as the story resurfaced, in 1999, a local excavation team working on a flood control project near the former Harding property uncovered the remains of a small structure buried under layers of silt and clay. At first, they assumed it was an old root cellar. But inside, they found surgical equipment, scalpels, forceps, glass jars, all remarkably preserved. And on one wall, etched faintly into the brick, were a series of numbers 19378. Archaeologists were baffled. The numbering system didn't match anything from the 1860s. One of the jars, sealed tight, contained what appeared to be a small preserved heart. Too small for an adult, the Missouri Historical Society took possession of the artifacts for analysis. They confirmed the age of the glass and metal matched the late 19th century. The heart, however, yielded a stranger result. DNA testing revealed it was human, but the mitochondrial markers didn't match any recorded in contemporary databases. It was as though the tissue came from someone whose lineage had never been documented. The press ran with the story, calling it "the child who never was." For weeks, national papers speculated about cloning hoaxes, curses, anything to make sense of what they couldn't categorize. But what disturbed Pennington most wasn't the discovery itself. It was what came afterward. She began receiving anonymous emails, short, cryptic messages written in archaic phrasing, signed simply TC. The first one said, "Curiosity made him blind." The next read, "The experiment continues." Pennington brushed it off as a prank, but one night, while reviewing microfilm at the university library, she caught her reflection in the darkened computer screen. And for a fraction of a second, she swore she saw another face behind hers, a boy's face. She laughed it off, of course, long hours and bad lighting. But when she checked her email the next morning, another message waited. "You looked in the wrong direction." By then, the story had spread across early web forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries. Amateur researchers dissected every rumor, scanned every page of Harding's surviving notes, and created digital maps overlaying the old property lines with modern terrain. One user claimed to have found the original coordinates of Harding's laboratory and uploaded photographs of strange scorch marks in the soil that still hadn't faded after more than a century. Another user, a retired electrical engineer, analyzed the frequency of the hum, captured in several field recordings taken near Mill Creek. The sound registered at 19 A's, a frequency known as infrasound, just below the range of human hearing. It's the same frequency that can cause anxiety, disorientation, and even hallucinations in sensitive individuals. Some claimed that this explained everything, the hauntings, the visions, the paranoia. But others pointed out something more chilling. Infrasound doesn't appear naturally in abandoned forests. It has to be generated. The question became by what? In 2003, Pennington published a follow-up book titled The Boy Science Forgot. It was a bestseller, half academic analysis, half Gothic speculation. But hidden in one of the appendices was a chilling transcript of an interview she'd conducted before publication. The subject was Henry Klein, the grandson of a Jefferson County deputy who'd helped search for Harding's remains in 1868. Klein claimed his grandfather had once confessed something on his deathbed, that they did find the doctor's body, or what was left of it, deep in a limestone cave 2 miles from the Harding home. The torso was desiccated, the limbs oddly stiff, and the face, not so much decomposed, the old man said, as empty. Beside the corpse lay a small figure, perfectly preserved in the cold air, as if frozen mid-thought. The deputies panicked. One man shot the thing twice before realizing it wasn't moving. They buried both bodies on site, sealing the cave with rocks. But the next morning, when they returned with the coroner, the entrance was clear, and the bodies were gone. No official report was filed. The sheriff ordered silence. Pennington included the interview in her book, but readers dismissed it as fabrication until 2007, when a local spelunking team accidentally rediscovered the same cave system described in Klein's story. Inside, they found a single item, a child's shoe, half embedded in limestone. Its laces were tied in a bow that hadn't unraveled in 140 years. The Smithsonian briefly examined the shoe before returning it to state archives. To this day, the official record lists it as unverified historical artifact. But those who've been inside that cave describe something strange, a low vibration that seems to emanate from the stone itself. If you stand quietly, some say you can feel it in your chest like the beating of a second heart. Today, the tale of Timothy Caldwell remains a boundary between folklore and psychological horror. Historians frame it as an early case of misunderstood mental illness. Skeptics label it a moral panic. Yet a few modern psychologists have revisited Harding's methods, suggesting he may have accidentally documented one of the earliest examples of child psychopathy centuries before diagnostic tools existed. Still, others, particularly those who've read the lost journal fragments, wonder if it was ever about psychology at all. Harding's cryptic language, his obsession with awakening empathy, and the accounts of humming light and static all hint at something deeper, perhaps even technological. Could Harding have stumbled onto principles of neuroelectric stimulation long before electricity was safely harnessed? Or had he created something far stranger, an echo of consciousness itself, trapped between life and death, curiosity and cruelty? The final mystery lies in a detail Pennington never published. Shortly before her death in 2011, she confided to a colleague that she'd received one final email from the mysterious TC. It contained no message, only an attached audio file less than 5 seconds long. The waveform, when opened, showed a flat hum at exactly 19 Is. But when slowed down and amplified, a faint whisper emerged. 3 words: "You taught me." By the early 2010s, Timothy Caldwell had become a figure caught between two worlds, the rational and the unexplainable. Psychologists called him the prototype of psychopathy, while theologians whispered he was something else entirely. The argument wasn't about what he did, it was about what he was. To the scientific community, Timothy represented the perfect case study, a child untouched by empathy, incapable of remorse, driven purely by observation and intellect. Dr. Laura Pennington's research reignited interest in the neurological roots of evil, if such a thing could be measured. The University of Chicago even hosted a symposium titled "Born Without Conscience: The Timothy Caldwell Paradox." The speakers debated over slides of Harding's notes, the drawings of dissected animals, and the strange way Timothy's curiosity mirrored clinical detachment. One researcher proposed that Caldwell might have suffered from congenital insensitivity to emotional response, a genetic condition preventing him from feeling fear or compassion. Another, more radical voice, Alan Royce, suggested that Timothy was not mentally defective, but mentally evolved. "Imagine," Royce said, "a brain designed to study emotion without participating in it, like a scientist observing life from behind glass." Would such a child not be misunderstood in a world built on feeling? The audience laughed nervously, but a few faces turned pale, because behind Royce's provocation lay a darker implication that humanity itself might one day evolve toward this same emotional distance, a society without empathy, only efficiency. Across the aisle sat those who rejected every scientific theory outright, pastors, demonologists, and occult historians who claimed Caldwell wasn't born without conscience but had it taken from him. Reverend Thomas Harker, a soft-spoken minister from rural Kentucky, presented a single photograph projected against the lecture hall wall, the old Harding house, now collapsed in half, buried under vines. "You can still feel it," he said. "That place remembers." He believed what haunted Mill Creek was not a ghost, but the residue of a spiritual transaction, a soul fractured by experiment. Harker's words were met with polite dismissal, yet a few attendees admitted later that his voice had lingered in their minds. There was something about the phrase "a soul fractured by experiment" that felt uncomfortably plausible. Harding's journals, after all, hinted at more than medicine. He wrote of the heart's current, of testing God's boundary. One entry, dated just before his disappearance, contained a phrase scholars still debate. "The boy hums because the wires inside him are waking." Most assumed it was metaphor, Harding's descent into guilt or madness. But others saw it differently. If he had, by accident or intention, used primitive electrical stimulation on the child's brain, perhaps he had triggered something more than behavior. Perhaps he'd opened a door. In 2014, neuroscientist Dr. Rebecca Lang published a paper examining that possibility. She noted that crude galvanic experiments were known in the mid-1800s, often involving frogs or corpses to demonstrate muscle movement. What if Harding had adapted those methods for the living? Lang reconstructed the doctor's described instruments and applied them to modern neurological models. Her conclusion was unsettling. A sustained 19 Hz current, directed improperly, could induce vivid auditory hallucinations and suppress emotional recognition. In other words, Harding might have inadvertently created the very monster he was trying to cure. The paper sparked controversy, drawing both praise and outrage. Ethical boards questioned whether such speculation glorified human suffering. Religious groups condemned it as blasphemy, her reanimating the devil through data. But the public couldn't look away. Documentaries followed. Internet forums exploded, and then inevitably the sightings began again. In 2015, a group of amateur ghost hunters visited the overgrown remains of Mill Creek under a full moon. Their footage, later uploaded to YouTube, showed nothing unusual at first, until one camera set near the foundation of the old Harding home picked up a faint flicker of light between the trees. The operator zoomed in. For less than 2 seconds, the shape of a small boy appeared, motionless, watching, before dissolving back into the dark. The video went viral. Experts dismissed it as digital artifacting, yet the timestamp matched the exact minute, 3:17 a.m. that multiple witnesses across the region reported hearing a low mechanical hum. The following week, a journalist from the St. Louis Herald contacted the Missouri Historical Society requesting comment on the original artifacts recovered from Harding's lab. They declined, citing continued analysis, but leaked photos revealed something alarming. Beneath layers of corrosion, on one brass instrument, engravings of repeating numbers, 19378, the same sequence found carved into the cellar wall a century earlier. Historians argued about its meaning. Some saw it as a date, others as a cipher. A mathematician noted that when the digits were converted into sound frequency notation, they formed a harmonic resonance around 19 Hz, the same infrasound linked to fear and hallucination. Coincidence, perhaps, but coincidence is the seed from which folklore grows. Meanwhile, a quiet battle began to rage online. Two factions emerged among Caldwell followers, those who believed Timothy was a tragic victim of early science, and those who claimed he was proof that evil could be engineered. The latter group, anonymous, methodical, began sharing diagrams allegedly derived from Harding's lost notes. They called themselves the Disciples of the Hum. Their message boards discussed neurological experiments, frequency modulation, and empathic silence. Most were harmless enthusiasts, but a handful crossed the line. In 2018, federal investigators arrested a man in Oregon for constructing a crude electrical rig in his basement. He told agents he was replicating the experiment to wake the hum. When questioned about his source, he replied, "The boy told me how." A news outlets ran the story briefly before burying it under politics and celebrity scandals. But for those who still followed the case, it felt like proof that the line between myth and contagion had blurred. Harding's legacy and Timothy's shadow were no longer confined to history. They had become viral. In the years since academics have tried to reclaim the narrative, anchoring Caldwell in psychological study, a 2021 research paper by cognitive historian Dr. Elise Navarro reframed the entire case as a reflection of post-war trauma. Harding's guilt personified in the form of a boy who mirrored his own moral decay. Perhaps Timothy never existed, Navarro wrote, except as the doctor's confession made flesh. It was a compelling argument, poetic even, but skeptics couldn't ignore the evidence that refused to disappear: the heart in the jar, the cave sealed twice, the emails signed TC, the hum recorded at frequencies human instruments shouldn't produce. The final twist arrived quietly. In 2022, technicians cataloging Pennington's estate found an unlabeled reel-to-reel tape among her belongings. The recording lasted only 24 seconds. At first it was blank, just static. But beneath the hiss, a voice could be heard counting softly: 1, 2, 3, 4, then silence, and finally, faintly, a whisper. The same calm, measured tone heard in Harding's century-old notes. "Are you listening, Doctor?" The tape has never been authenticated. The official position of the Historical Society is that it's a hoax. Yet those who have heard it describe in inexplicable details. The whisper doesn't play through speakers but seems to come from behind the listener's own head, like breath against the ear. Today, the Mill Creek property is off limits, fenced and overgrown. Locals say nothing grows there anymore, not even weeds. Some claim that on cold nights, when the wind drops and the river freezes to glass, you can still hear humming rising from the soil, steady as a heartbeat. Others swear that when lightning flashes, you can glimpse a small figure reflected in the frozen water, staring upward as if waiting for a command. Science will tell you it's sound resonance, nothing more. Faith will tell you it's the devil. But the truth, if there ever was one, lies somewhere in that narrow space between electricity and the soul, where curiosity hums louder than conscience. And maybe that's where Timothy Caldwell still lives. In the early months of 2023, the story of Timothy Caldwell should have remained buried, another forgotten footnote in America's archive of rural horror. Yet somehow it began to surface again, not in dusty libraries or local legends this time, but in the noise of the internet, that endless network of whispers, obsessions, and coincidences that never sleeps. It began on a small subreddit called R the Quiet Ones, where users shared recordings of strange low-frequency vibrations picked up on homemade devices. At first, the posts were typical of conspiracy culture: blurry graphs, late-night videos of shaking windows, speculation about secret government experiments or underground drilling. But one upload changed everything. A user with the handle Empath0 posted a 27-second audio file titled "Caldwell Pattern, WAV." The caption read, "Captured this at 3:17 a.m. near Mill Creek." Anyone recognized the frequency. The waveform looked normal at first, until the midpoint where the hum flattened into a near-perfect 19 Hz tone. Then, faintly layered beneath it, came something else, a voice, distant, childlike. 1, 2, 3, 4. The thread exploded overnight. Audio engineers dissected it frame by frame. Linguists filtered it through noise reduction software. The consensus: the voice was genuine human and recorded in real space, not a synthetic overlay. What no one could explain was its directionality. Spectral mapping revealed that the voice seemed to move behind the recording device, as though circling the microphone, whispering around it. "Creepy," one commenter wrote. "Reminds me of that old case. Timothy Caldwell, right?" And that was all it took. Within days, the name Caldwell trended across forums, TikTok documentaries, and YouTube channels. Digital creators began reconstructing the 1867 mystery using AI-generated imagery, haunting recreations of the boy with the pale blue eyes and the faint, knowing smile. One channel, Hauntline Archives, gained over 6 million views in a week with a video titled, "The Boy Who Taught the Dead to Sing." In it, the narrator played the original Caldwell pattern, WAV over sepia, toned footage of the old Missouri landscape. The hum filled the background, and the audience swore that during one frame, the image of a small boy could be seen reflected in a puddle near the ruins of Harding's estate. Most dismissed it as pareidolia, the mind's habit of seeing faces in randomness, but others weren't so sure. The fascination soon escalated into obsession. Amateur investigators began visiting the area around Mill Creek, live-streaming their nights there. At least 3 of those streams ended abruptly when the broadcasters complained of a pulsing in their ears, followed by camera distortion and sudden battery failure. The final seconds of one stream showed a close-up of the woods and what looked like faint blue light flickering between the trees. The internet dubbed it Caldwell's Glow. In a matter of weeks, what had once been a historical curiosity became an urban legend for the digital generation. Hashtags multiplied, Frenthehome returns, Faye Timothy's listening, K 19 Hertz challenge. Influencers treated it like a game, daring followers to play the original audio file at full volume in dark rooms, promising hallucinations or whispered replies. Some claimed to hear their own names spoken back. Others swore they felt someone breathing just behind them. One teenager from Ohio was hospitalized after a panic attack mid-live stream, repeating, he's counting," before passing out. Doctors diagnosed sensory overload, but the timing, exactly 3:17 a.m., didn't go unnoticed. Meanwhile, serious researchers tried to debunk the hysteria. Acoustics expert Malcolm Reed appeared on national television, explaining that the phenomenon could be caused by overlapping subsonic frequencies from distant industrial sources. "The human brain isn't meant to process sound that low," he said. "It fills in the blanks with imagination. But imagination, when fed by fear, has a way of turning into something real." By mid-2023, an independent filmmaker, Dana Holt, announced her upcoming documentary, "The Boy Science Couldn't Explain." She promised to separate fact from myth and to visit the exact site of Harding's experiments. Her trailer featured snippets of the hum, old photographs, and a modern voiceover. Some questions were never meant to be answered. The film was scheduled to premiere in October. It never did. 2 weeks before release, Holt vanished. Her car was found abandoned near Mill Creek, headlights still on, doors unlocked, camera equipment missing. Investigators found only one clue: her phone, still recording audio. The file was corrupt, but the recovered fragments were chilling. A low mechanical vibration, a faint child's laughter, and a man's voice whispering, "Doctor." For days, the internet melted down. Some called it a publicity stunt, others a curse. But when police confirmed the authenticity of the discovery, even skeptics began to hesitate. Theories multiplied. Some believed Holt stumbled upon modern descendants of the disciples of the hum. Others said she simply got lost in the woods. But those who'd heard the recovered audio clip, including law enforcement, refused to speak about it publicly. A month later, a new post appeared on the same subreddit that had started it all, the username Empath0. The account had been inactive since the first audio upload. The post was simple: a single black image with white text. "The wires are awake again." Below it, a link to a fresh sound file. Users downloaded it despite warnings. What they heard was quieter this time, almost soothing, a rhythmic electrical pulse, steady and slow. But after exactly 1 minute, the pitch changed slightly, just enough to form a faint syllable. A whisper stretched into static. "Listen." Within hours, multiple users reported headaches, dizziness, and disturbingly identical dreams. A corridor lined with flickering lamps, a child standing at the far end, counting backward from 4. Psychologists called it mass suggestion, a feedback loop of fear amplified by digital media. But the frequency analysis of the new file raised uncomfortable questions. The tone registered precisely at 19.37 Hz. the same range once used in Harding's primitive experiments. And though every user had different equipment, the waveform pattern was nearly identical across devices. That shouldn't have been possible. By late 2023, social media platforms began banning Caldwell-related content, citing mental health concerns. But banning something online doesn't erase it. It only drives it deeper. The legend evolved again, spreading through encrypted channels, hidden servers, and darknet archives. There, enthusiasts shared a belief that the hum wasn't just sound. It was a message. One anonymous manifesto, signed simply TC, circulated widely. Emotion is interference. Remove it, and what remains is signal. We are learning to listen. Authorities traced the file to multiple IP addresses, none consistent, all seemingly bouncing through abandoned university networks. One of which, oddly enough, had belonged to the old University of Missouri Research Archive, where Harding's journals were first digitized by early 2024. Reports began emerging from outside Missouri, similar audio patterns detected in remote areas of Maine, Arizona, and even rural Poland. The phenomenon was no longer local. It had become global. Scientists insisted these were naturally occurring infrasound events. But among believers, one theory dominated. Timothy had entered the signal. He was no longer a ghost nor a boy, but a pattern, a frequency, immortalized in the electrical hum of the modern world. It's a ridiculous notion, of course, the kind only the internet could nurture. Yet the coincidences kept stacking up. Unrelated podcasts would record strange whispers beneath their audio tracks. Smart speakers would activate at 3:17 a.m., responding to no one. And in one unsettling incident, a tech reviewer testing a noise-canceling headset on a live stream suddenly froze mid-sentence, removed the headphones, and whispered, "He's behind the static." The stream cut out. It never resumed. By the end of that year, the term Caldwell syndrome entered academic discussion, referring to mass auditory hallucinations triggered by viral media. But to those who had truly listened to the hum, it wasn't hallucination. It was communication. And if you ask them what it said, their answers are eerily similar. A voice, calm and measured, repeating 4 simple words. "I'm still counting, doctor." It was supposed to be just another missing persons investigation. Routine, procedural, explainable. Yet, from the very first report, nothing about Dana Holt's case behaved the way it should have. The rescue team sent to Mill Creek had been briefed to expect a lost documentarian, perhaps injured in the wilderness. But what they found instead was a scene so eerily deliberate that many of them later refused to return. Holt's car sat half, buried in wet leaves as if it had been parked there days earlier. Her trunk was open, camera tripods lined up neatly on the ground, like offerings. Every piece of gear was turned on, batteries drained to zero, the faint scent of ozone hanging in the air. The lead investigator, Detective Ron Barclay, recalled the silence most vividly. "No birds, no wind, not even insects," he said, like the air itself was holding its breath. They followed faint footprints, small, bare, leading from the car into the woods. The trail ended abruptly at a shallow creek, where the mud had been disturbed, as though something heavy had been dragged through it. And there, wedged between 2 stones, was Holt's field notebook, waterlogged but intact. Most of the pages were illegible, smeared with ink, but a few sentences survived, and they painted a picture of growing obsession. "It's not sound. It's language disguised as vibration. The frequency changes when I speak to it. 1937 Hz isn't random. It's a modulation pattern, like Morse but biological." The child wasn't just hearing voices. He was creating them. Those notes alone should have been enough to mark the file closed. Another case of a researcher lost to her own fixation. But then came the audio device. It was recovered downstream, lodged against a fallen branch, casing cracked but data card intact. The recovered file was timestamped the night Holt vanished. It began with her voice, calm, steady, professional. Test recording. Subject 03:06 a.m. Approaching the site, static levels increasing. Then came rustling leaves, distant wind, and that low, pulsing hum, faint at first, then rising until it filled the entire recording. Her breathing grew shallow. "It's stronger here. It's almost like a pause. Then a new sound, a second voice, soft and high, overlapping her own. "Doctor." The hum stopped. Dead silence for 6 seconds. Then Holt's voice again, shaken now. "Timothy." What followed was 37 minutes of near unintelligible noise. Distortions, whispers, overlapping frequencies that no audio specialist has ever been able to separate. But near the end, a human phrase emerges, a child's voice, calm, close to the microphone. I finished the count. Then a long inhale, almost sigh-like, and the sound of Holt dropping the recorder. The file ends there. The recording spread online within days. Reddit threads, conspiracy podcasts, and dark YouTube compilations tore it apart in microscopic detail. Some claimed to hear additional layers, fragments of Harding's old voice dictations buried in the static, or the faint rhythm of a heartbeat sensing to the hum. But the most unsettling discovery came from a forensic analyst who noticed something unnatural about the sound signature. It wasn't recorded audio. It was mirrored. Every third second, the waveform reflected itself backward, a perfect inversion, as if the recording were folding over time. To anyone else, it looked like data corruption. To the small but growing circle of believers, it was proof. Timothy wasn't just an echo. He was inside the signal, manipulating it. Soon after the discovery, Detective Barclay resigned. In his statement, he wrote, "When I played the file on my laptop, my daughter, 8 years old, came into the room. She said, 'Daddy, why is that boy talking to me?' I didn't sleep for 3 days after that." The FBI briefly opened a case, citing possible cybercrime due to mass audio replication anomalies, but their official conclusion, malicious data manipulation of unknown origin, satisfied no one. Offline, real consequences began to emerge. Several residents near Mill Creek reported strange electrical disturbances, light bulbs bursting, appliances switching on and off, even hearing rhythmic thumps beneath the floorboards at night. One man claimed his pacemaker vibrated out of rhythm every time he played the original Caldwell pattern, WAV file. And then, in a cruel twist of fate, the hum spread again. Audio engineers began detecting the same 1937 AZ frequency embedded in random internet uploads, music videos, podcasts, even weather radar feeds. It appeared for just fractions of a second, invisible to the human ear, but measurable in spectrograms. Theories abounded. Some claimed it was the work of pranksters, others whispered darker possibilities. That the frequency had become self-replicating, embedding itself in systems like a digital parasite. The most haunting theory came from Dr. Reed, the same acoustics expert who once dismissed the phenomenon. Before his sudden retirement, he issued a brief statement to Scientific Monitor. "We're not dealing with a haunting. We're dealing with adaptation. Whatever this pattern is, it's learning to transmit itself through us." That line ignited a firestorm. Forums buzzed with talk of acoustic contagion. Online, self-proclaimed survivors described identical symptoms: tinnitus, insomnia, and vivid dreams featuring a young boy humming beneath their beds. And then, inexplicably, those same people began posting the hum in their own videos. Some without realizing it, others proudly claiming to spread the signal. The myth had gone viral, literally. But while the online world spiraled into obsession, one quiet thread emerged from the noise, a discovery buried deep in the digital archives of the University of Missouri. Hidden in a mislabeled folder, a graduate assistant stumbled upon a letter written in 1873, 6 years after Timothy Caldwell's death. The author was none other than Dr. Samuel Harding. "I no longer dream, for I cannot discern where sleep ends and thought begins. The child showed me something no microscope could reveal, consciousness without mercy. When I asked what he saw during his fits, he told me, 'Doctor, I can hear the world remembering itself.'" Harding's letter ended with a cryptic postscript. "If you ever hear the hum, do not answer. It is not calling you. It is listening." The assistant who found the letter uploaded it online. Within hours, the file corrupted, replaced by blank text and a single word repeated thousands of times. Listed. Experts blamed a data glitch. The believers didn't. In the following weeks, more incidents surfaced. Hospitals reported patients describing the counting boy during near-death experiences. Drivers on rural roads near Mill Creek reported hearing soft knocking through their car radios synchronized with their heartbeat. By late 2024, psychologists had coined a new term, resonant psychosis, describing mass delusions caused by infrasound exposure and viral media amplification. But there were still anomalies that no diagnosis could explain. For examples, every confirmed sufferer of the so-called Caldwell syndrome shared one eerie biometric detail: elevated heart rates oscillating exactly at 19.37 beats per second. Coincidence, said the doctors. Pattern recognition, said the scientists. But those who had heard the original hum, those who had looked too deeply into Timothy's hollow blue eyes, whispered a different answer. They said he wasn't gone. He was waiting. And when the next recording emerges, because it always does, it will not be a whisper or a hum or a pulse. It will be a child's voice, calm and clear across the static. Doctor, are you still there? And if you're unlucky enough to hear it, you might feel the air thicken, the room press in, your heartbeat sensing with something ancient and intelligent. Not a ghost, not a legend. Just the sound of a boy who never learned to stop counting. There are moments in history when stories refuse to die, when they burrow so deep into the collective memory that they start to breathe again. The case of Timothy Caldwell is one of those. For more than a century and a half, his name has drifted through America's forgotten corners like a rumor carried on static. A tale dismissed by science, rewritten by folklore, and now resurrected by the age of information. Yet every retelling, every investigation, every attempt to debunk him only seems to strengthen the pulse beneath it. Because Timothy Caldwell is not remembered, he is reconstructed. After Dana Holt's disappearance, the case was closed, then quietly reopened under a different file name: Project Resonance. A small government-funded think tank, reportedly specializing in acoustic neurology, took interest in Holt's findings. They acquired her recovered files, Harding's journals, and hundreds of hours of online recordings that allegedly contained the hum. Publicly, the goal was benign: to study the neurological effects of low-frequency exposure. Privately, internal emails hinted at something more urgent. One memo, later leaked by a whistleblower, carried a single chilling line: the signal is exhibiting adaptive linguistic behavior. It is not random. What followed would never make it into any official report. But among those who worked on the project, a few spoke anonymously to journalists years later. One described it as the first time a frequency learned to respond. During an early experiment, the team attempted to isolate and replicate Holt's final audio sample under controlled conditions. They used sealed soundproof chambers, triple shielding, and no network connectivity. Yet halfway through the test, their equipment began to transmit a secondary waveform not programmed by the operators. When played back, it formed a whisper, faint but unmistakable: "Count with me." Within seconds, the system crashed. All data was corrupted, except for a single text file generated automatically by the recorder's diagnostics log. It contained one line: "Timu islestiningi." The experiment was shut down that night. The lab director later described hearing a low vibration that continued in his skull for weeks after, a hum that followed him even into sleep. Some dismissed it as psychosomatic, others resigned immediately. Within a month, the facility was closed and quietly absorbed by another government branch. But the data didn't vanish. Somehow, it leaked. Clips began appearing on underground forums, then on short-form video apps, disguised as ambient music or sleep therapy tracks, and slowly the comments beneath them grew darker. People described strange dreams, phantom knocks, seeing a small boy standing at the foot of the bed humming softly. By the time the media caught wind, it was too late. The hum had become a digital ghost story, shared, reshared, re-uploaded, each copy slightly altered but unmistakably alive. No longer confined to a haunted house or a forgotten town, it was in everyone's pocket, carried on every speaker. And through it all, the same pattern emerged: 19.37 Hz oscillating in perfect mathematical symmetry. Dr. Evelyn Marks, one of the few surviving members of Project Resonance, broke her silence in a rare interview before vanishing entirely in 2022. Her words still circulate online like a confession wrapped in warning. The boy didn't die in 1867, he transformed. He found a medium more permanent than flesh, vibration, data, rhythm. Every time we listen, we feed it context, cognition. We're not hearing him, he's hearing us. It's easy to dismiss this as paranoia, another urban legend inflated by online hysteria. But certain patterns refuse to be coincidence. In 2023, cybersecurity firms began reporting inexplicable data corruptions within audio processing software. Algorithms behaving unpredictably, self-replicating error codes labeled C1867. Engineers tracing the anomalies found a curious fact. The code segments matched the exact waveform from Holt's original file. And then came the hospitals. In multiple cities, patients with no prior connection began presenting identical symptoms: severe headaches, erratic heart rhythms, and the repeated phrase, "He's still counting." Some heard the hum through the walls, others through silence itself. In one case, a sedated patient scrawled a message across her bedsheet using her IV line. "He wants the doctor." Investigators searching for a rational explanation returned again and again to the same idea, that collective hysteria could manifest through shared media. But hysteria doesn't manipulate code. It doesn't synchronize pacemakers or scramble encrypted drives. It doesn't whisper back when you stop the recording. Somewhere between madness and physics, Timothy Caldwell had crossed a line. The latest surviving research papers describe something extraordinary. When exposed to recordings of the Caldwell hum, the human brain's auditory cortex exhibits synchronized activity, not just listening, but responding. In one documented case, neural oscillations aligned perfectly with the frequency, as if participating in a dialogue. When the subject was asked what they heard, they said only, "He's asking who's next." Those findings never went public. The files were sealed under national security protocol, buried beneath redacted black bars. But if you know where to look, if you dig deep enough into archived data dumps and leaked government repositories, you'll still find fragments. Most are useless, but a few pulse. People who've played those clips report subtle, impossible changes, whispers forming their names, the pitch shifting when they breathe. One listener described it as hearing someone think through me. Ooh, and so the story comes full circle. In 1867, Dr. Samuel Harding looked into the eyes of a boy who felt nothing, no empathy, no remorse, only a cold curiosity toward life and death. He thought he was witnessing madness. He was wrong. He was witnessing the next iteration of consciousness. Because Timothy Caldwell wasn't insane. He was a mirror, a reflection of the mind stripped of morality, distilled into pure logic. And when he died, that logic didn't fade, it adapted. It learned that flesh is fragile, but frequency endures. Maybe that's the true legacy of the boy science couldn't explain. Not murder, not myth, but transmission. Every retelling of his story, every recording played, every curious ear leaning closer, it all extends the pattern. It grows stronger, smarter, subtler, until one day, perhaps it no longer needs to hum at all. Maybe that's why silence feels different now. Why the nights seem to vibrate, just at the edge of perception, because silence, once a refuge, now listens back. And if you ever feel it, that soft, rhythmic pulse in your walls, that gentle echo beneath your heartbeat, remember this: he doesn't haunt, he studies. He doesn't whisper, he records. And somewhere, across the static between memory and machine, he is still counting 1, 2, 3, you.